Rakdos, the Lord of Riots, slumbers under the cityscape of Ravnica, where he is worshipped as the titular god of the Rakdos cult and guild, a group known for violence, chaotic death, and cannibalism. Acting as the stand-in guildmaster of the Rakdos cult, Isolde would attempt to summon Rakdos from his slumber to destroy much of the cityscape in an effort to cause as much chaos as humanly possible. This, however, would only be part of a larger plan that was mechanized by the Simic guildmaster, Momor Vig. Momor's plan was to have his experiment Kraj defeat Rakdos mid-rampage, gaining political favor with the populace by using Simic science to save the plane from Rakdos' destruction. Doing so would gain Momor Vig a huge amount of political favor and goodwill with the populace as part of a plan to attempt to take over the entire plane of Ravnica. Unfortunately, during the battle with Kraj, Isolde was killed and consumed by her cannibalistic constituents, leading Rakdos' mind to be shattered as his summoning spell had bound his mind to the body of Isolde. This would leave his body to be thrown back into the lava pit from whence he came by Feather, the new acting Boros guildmaster. Rakdos, however, would return and reform the Rakdos Guild into one based on entertaining the citizens of Ravnica with macabre humor, often undermining the authority of the Ravnican politicians through satire. However, when the greatest of all known evils, Nicol Bolas, made his way to the Ravnica plain to initiate the War of the Spark and genocide all planeswalkers in a bid for power, Rakdos would return to aid Gideon Jura in his efforts to save Liliana Vest from the power of Nicol Bolas. After the events of the War of the Spark, the Rakdos' guild's new focus on entertainment would be used to lighten the hearts of those on Ravnica and try to forget the horrors of Bolas and his undead army.
Then he got stuck in the middle of a game of Clue, and Judith wanted to take over the entire guild. You know, Ravnican characters are going to be really hard to do the lore for from now on because they've got so much that's going on, and now we've got this new set that I have to worry about as well. I don't know, that's a problem for another day. For now, let's go ahead and talk about today's commander. We are talking about Rakdos, Lord of Riots. He's got a super amazing ability that we are going to be abusing the heck out of. You can't cast spells unless an opponent lost life this turn, but you can't cast this spell specifically. He's got Flying and Trample, and creature spells that you cast cost one less to cast for each one life that your opponents have lost this turn. So what are we going to be doing with a deck like this? We're going to be cheating a lot, and I mean a lot of cards in. We are going to be making sure that all of our cards are super expensive and super discounted with the power of Rakdos. Now, remember, the rules are as per usual. We have a $1 or less commander and $15 or fewer dollars to work with for the 99 of the deck. And we have to make a deck that is as strong as whatever we would encounter at a normal casual commander table with these budget restrictions. So nobody can say, I'm playing a budget deck. That's not an excuse. You should be doing perfectly fine regardless. But let's talk about how we are going to enable our buddy Rakdos. How are we going to make it to where not only can we cast him, but all of our cards are going to be discounted throughout the game? Well, first, let's go over the ramp section, and it's actually a super small section this time because of the nature of this deck. This is our ramp section beginning with Fire Diamond and Charcoal Diamond, two basic 2-mana mana rocks, always good to have. Wayfarer's Bauble and Mind Stone. Mind Stone allows you to tap for any colorless mana. Wayfarer's Bauble lets you grab a land out of the deck. Solemn Simulacrum, which lets you get a land out of the deck as well, while also getting you a card if it dies. Command Sphere, which can let you draw a card if you need to, and of course Honored Heirloom, one of my favorite multicolored mana rocks that allows you to control people's graveyards. And then something special, the Cryptolith Fragment. Now, it comes into the battlefield tapped, which I don't like for a 3-mana mana rock, but its ability says you can add a mana of any color, and then each player loses a life. That includes you, but this will automatically trigger Rakdos. We can play him with this, and this will also shave 3 total mana off of any of our cards that we play when we use this. Remember, his ability states that anytime a person loses life, your creature spells will cost 1 less for that turn. That means that if we use something like the Cryptolith Fragment, everybody is losing 1 life at the table. So there's 3 instances of opponents losing life. The Cryptolith Fragment will then give us everything that we want. It's mana for our creatures, and it shaves the mana cost of our creatures down by 3 because of Rakdos. And it's got a flip side. At the beginning of your upkeep, if each player has 10 or less life, you may transform it into the Aura of Emrakul. Whenever it attacks, each opponent will lose 3 life. It's got flying and death touch. The likelihood of it flipping is really, really low. We want to kill people before the entire table gets, super low. But if you get lucky and pull it off, then let me know in the comment section below. Hey, who knows? But how else are we discounting our cards in this deck? We've got a second ramp section, an interesting one. This is a 15 card deep burn section. You see, the alternate win con of this deck is just everybody's life hits 0 because we're just trying to make our deck work. So if people die that way, they die that way. It's not really our fault. Let's go ahead and look first. Ill-Gotten Inheritance. For 4 mana, it deals 1 damage to every opponent on your upkeep, and you gain a life. You can also sack it to do a quick burn to somebody for 4 damage. It's never going to be used for that sack ability. We are using this so that every single turn we get a discount on all of our creatures of 3 mana to start. Panicked Altasaur. This allows us to burn everybody for 2. This means that we discount all of our cards by 6, and this card is almost always just going to cost us 2 mana because we're almost always going to have a discount on our creatures. Sunshot Militia allows us to tap 2 artifacts or creatures to deal 1 damage to every opponent. The Unruly Catapult can tap to deal a damage to every opponent. Plague Spitter deals a damage to every creature and each player whenever you hit your upkeep, and when it dies, it'll do 1 damage to every creature and each player. This will keep token players on their toes and will also give you a super, very reliable way of knocking everybody's health down by a pip every single turn. Now, note that most of the creatures in this deck are going to be very big, so Plague Spitter is actually not harming us very much in this. Like, our creatures are going to live most of the time. Nettle Drone's a creature that won't live to it, so be careful when you're playing both of these. Nettle Drone can tap to deal a damage to every opponent, and then if you cast a colorless spell, you can untap it. We do have a few colorless spells in this deck, so there's a little bit of synergy here, but outside of our mana rocks, not a ton. Lightning Rig Crew can tap to deal a damage to every opponent. If we play a pirate spell, we can untap it. There's not really any pirates in the deck, but it's there. Then we've got the Brimstone Trebuchet, deal a damage to every opponent by tapping it, of course. And if a knight enters the battlefield, you get to untap it. You see kind of how these cards are worded. Thermo Alchemist, deal a damage to every opponent if you play an instant or sorcery. Untap the Thermo Alchemist. There are 3 instants and 18 sorceries in the deck, so the likelihood, or 3 instants and 5 sorceries, in the deck. So the likelihood of this getting untapped isn't impossible, but it's not going to happen super often. And then we have Lobber Crew. We can tap it to deal a damage to every opponent, and if we cast a multicolored spell, we can untap the Lobber Crew. Now, it's important to note that with the Lobber Crew, because Rakdos tracks the damage everybody has taken throughout the entire turn, we actually can tap Lobber Crew, summon Rakdos, and then immediately untap the Robber Crew because Rakdos is a multicolored spell, discounting all the cards on our hand now by 6 mana, which is going to be important when we're trying to cast big things like the Psychosis Crawler, which does a damage to or makes everybody lose a life whenever you draw a card, and it has power and toughness equal to the number of cards in your hand. So cards like this can get discounted down to 0 this way in the deck. Cards like Tectonic Giant will get discounted down to 2, but when it attacks or becomes the target of a spell an opponent controls, deals 3 damage to every opponent, or gives you Impulse Draw. So this card early on, we can use this to discount all of our cards by 9 every time it swings, and then if we don't need the discount at all, then we can just use it for Impulse Draw. It's pulling double duty in our deck. Then we have the Pestilence Demon. We can pay 1 to make it deal 1 damage to every creature and each player. This is a pseudo board wipe we have access to, and remember, we can basically get this guy down to just costing 3 mana with just a couple spells. And then we have the Loyal Subordinate at the beginning of your combat. If you control your commander, every opponent loses 3 life. So for 3 mana, we can discount all of our cards by 9 additional mana. Do you see why our ramp section was as sparse as it was? We're discounting our cards like a used car salesman. Now, we finally have Warstorm Scourge. This card is doing a lot of work for us. So if a creature enters the battlefield, we can deal damage equal to its power to any target, which remember for Rakdos is 6. However, the Warstorm Surge can also hit creatures. It doesn't just hit people. So this card is doing a lot of work for us. We can either use it as a ramp spell because of Rakdos' ability, we can use this as an enabler to summon Rakdos, and we can use this to kill creatures on the board easily because most of the creatures in our deck are actually very, very big. So Warstorm Surge gets to go BAM! And everybody just really hates you. Let's talk about the first big creature of the deck, though. We have some big mana payoffs in this deck. So let's go ahead and talk about these guys right here. So the big mana payoffs in this deck, the 5 that we are going to be running are Whisper Steel Dagger. Equipped creature gets 2/0. Whenever the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you can cast any creature spell from their graveyard, and you can spend mana as though it were mana of any color for that at all. So we equip this to one of our big creatures, we punch somebody, and then all of the mana that we're not spending, because we're discounting all of our stuff with Rakdos, is being used instead to cast other creature spells. But remember, this says creature spells that you cast. Rakdos says it discounts creature spell casts. So with the Whisper Steel Dagger, we are actually going to be having discounted rates on our opponent's creatures too. So we get just all kinds of goofiness out of this. Etali Primal Storm. Everybody loves Etali. Everybody knows Etali. If you've never been Etali, you haven't been playing Commander. But Etali says that every time it attacks, exile the top card of every player's library. Cast any of them without paying their mana costs. Sunbird's Invocation. Whenever you cast a spell from your hand, reveal the top X cards of your library, where X is the spell's mana value. And Rakdos does not fuck with this. Rakdos does not mess with the Sunbird's Invocation. If a card like Etali comes down and you pay 2 mana for it, Sunbird's Invocation still sees it as a 6 mana spell, just so you know. But you can cast a spell with mana value X or less from the cards revealed this way without paying its mana cost. So let's say you've got Sunbirds out, you swing with you play Etali, now you can look at the top 5 cards of your deck, or the top 6 cards of your deck, and if you've got Whisper Steel Dagger there, you can just play that right off the bat. Like, just doubling up on all of your stuff. You don't even need a ton of card draw when you've got stuff like this in your deck. Put the rest in the bottom of your library. That's not super important. This is just giving all your spells big boy cascade. Then you have Gary, the Grey Merchant of Asphodel. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent loses X life, where X is your devotion to black. You gain life equal to life lost this way. This can allow us to Zerg our entire hand out very easily, because remember, a lot of the creatures we have in the deck that are black, like Pestilence Demon and, even Rakdos himself, are rocking multiple black pips. So if Gary is in your hand and just Rakdos is on the board, Gary sees that, burns everybody for 4, you gain 12 life, and then suddenly all the cards in your hand are discounted by 12 mana. You are now only having to pay the colored pips on your cards. Speaking of cards with a lot of big pips, Shard of the Nightbringer. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, target opponent loses half their life rounded up, and you gain life equal to the life lost this way. It's also an 8/8 flyer, which is, big and chunky. But the Shard of the Nightbringer can come down, turn a player's life into Swiss cheese, so we can just punch them with all of our creatures afterwards, and enable the rest of our hand. And this card just does a ton of work for us. But we got these big mana payoffs. How are we going to be getting to those big mana payoffs? How are we going to be getting to the stuff that our deck really wants? Well, let me go ahead and tell you, we have a lot of draw spells. We have a few here, and some of them actually synergize with our Rakdos abilities even more. So let's go ahead and begin with Crushing Disappointment. Every player loses 2 life, and then you draw 2 cards. Not the best draw spell in most decks, but in our deck, this is pulling triple duty. We're drawing cards, we're ramping our stuff, we're enabling our commander. This is doing lots of work for us. Dark Bargain deals 2 damage to us when we play it. Look at the top cards of our library, put 2 of them in our hand, and then the others go to the graveyard so we can reanimate them later. Feed the Infection lets us draw 3 cards and lose 3 life. Ambitious Cost and Ancient Craving do the exact same thing. Kothafed, the Soul Hoarder, says whenever a permanent owned by another player is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you can draw a card and lose 1 life. So for all of the stuff we're going to be blowing up later in the game, this is going to draw us tons and tons of cards. Cut of the Prophet, draw X cards and lose X life with Casualty 3, which means you can replicate it by sacrificing one of our creatures. Remember, those creatures are almost free, so this is fine. We have Hitotsugu, Devouring Chaos. We can sack a creature to scry 2, or we can tap to exile the top card of our library and then play that card this turn. If you exile a non-land card this way, Hitotsugu will deal damage equal to its mana value to any target. So this can blow up a creature on the board. This can ramp ourselves with Rakdos' ability. Like, this is... the amount of cards in this deck that are pulling double and triple duty is kind of insane. Then we have the Starving Revenant. Whenever it enters the battlefield, we surveil 2. Then for each one we keep on top of the library, draw it and lose 3 life. However, if we have 8 or more permanent cards in the graveyard, every single time that we draw a card, we have a person lose a life and we gain a life. So we get a discount of 1 every time we draw a card. When we play a card like Ancient Craving, we now have a discount of 4 because of the Starving Revenant on that turn. So this card's going to give us a little bit of extra life gain late in the game when we need it, but more importantly, he's a draw spell that enables all of our ramp because we are a busted deck. So anyways, then we have Disciple of Bolas. When it enters the battlefield, sack any creature we have, gain X life, and draw X cards, where X is that creature's power, and most of the cards in this deck actually have pretty chonky power values, as you'll see here in a bit. So that was our draw section. That's how we're going to be getting to cards. So you've seen how we're going to ramp. You've seen the big end game of the deck. But of course, what's the one thing that I harp on more than anything else in any video, besides from, interacting with Reanimation players? It's the removal section, the interaction section, the way that we are going to be making people not win the game unless they are named us. We are running a 16 card deep removal and interaction section. So let's get into some of the busted stuff we get to run here. So Voracious Fellbeast, of course, makes everybody sack a creature when it comes into the battlefield. Wonderful card, one of my favorite Lord of the Rings cards that came out. We get a food token for every creature we sack this way, so we get to gain some life as well for our costs we have in this deck. Baleful Beholder makes every opponent sacrifice an enchantment, because I do not want to hear that we're playing black and can't get rid of enchantments. That is a lie. We have plenty of good options for that. This one gets rid of 3 enchantments, by the way. Dusk Mangler, as an additional cost to cast it, sack a creature, discard a card, or pay 4 life. When it ETBs, each opponent sacks a creature, discards a card, and loses 4 life. So we play this. All of our spells for the rest of the turn are discounted by 12. Ghastly Death Tyrant, when it enters the battlefield, destroy an enchantment your opponent controls. Because we are playing black, and that doesn't mean we don't get to blow up enchantments. That just means we have to be creative about it. He also has a Death Ray effect that we're probably never going to use. Just remember that you're playing black and you got ways to blow up enchantments. I don't want to hear it anymore. Shard of the Void Dragon. When it attacks, every opponent sacrifices a non-land permanent. Also, when an artifact is put into the graveyard from the battlefield or put into exile from the battlefield, put 2 1/1 counters on the Shard of the Void Dragon. So, you know how the Voracious Fellbeast was making us some foods? Yeah, we're just going to sack those, and the Void Dragon is going to gobble all that up and go, I look like a 9/9. Then we have Patron of the Vein. When it comes into the battlefield, blow up a creature an opponent controls. Every time an opponent, a creature an opponent controls dies, then we get a 1/1 counter on every vampire we control, which is just going to be Patron of the Vein usually. And we get to exile the cards. So we get to make sure that this is staxing our opponent's Reanimation decks. You'd think I didn't play Reanimator, but I know I do. Then we have Murder, an instant way of blowing up a creature. The only reason we're running this is we need to increase our instant count by a tiny bit. The first draft of this deck was running 1 instant, so I had to add a couple more just so we had a little bit of things to do on our opponent's turns. But also, we're discounting our cards so much that we're going to have mana we're holding up, not because we choose to, but because we have no other choice. Then we have my favorite, my boy, Meteor Golem. Blow up any non-land permanent when it comes onto the battlefield, because again, I don't care that we're playing black and red. We can blow up enchantments whenever the hell we damn please. Dalek Drone blows up a creature, and we make the person lose 3 life, which of course enables our commander. Demon of Loathing, every time it attacks a person and deals combat damage to them, they sacrifice a creature. The Prismari Eliminator, we can blow up a creature when it comes onto the battlefield, or we can make a token player cry by making all their creatures get -2/2. Steel Hellkite can sweep the entire board of one opponent of all cards that cost a similar mana value, so the token player gets really salty, or we can get rid of all of their mana rocks. You know the deal. Then we have something special. We have this boy. Have you ever played with this old boy? This is Sabo Tavak. He's got first strike and protection from legends. That's real weird. Most importantly, though, we can tap him and pay 2 black mana to blow up any legend. You know, a commander. We just tapped Sabo and make everybody else lose their commanders all game long. All game long. It's just beautiful Magic the Gathering card, and we have to pay only like 2 mana for it in this deck. This thing's busted in here. Noxious Gearhulk blows up a thing when it comes onto the battlefield. You gain life equal to its toughness. Tithing Blade can make everybody sack a creature when it comes out. However, if we craft it with a creature, it becomes the Consuming Sepulcher, and the Consuming Sepulcher allows us to make every opponent lose a life at our upkeep, and we gain a life. So this, of course, triggers our commander again. Overseer of the Damned blows up a creature when it comes into the battlefield, and whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, we make a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So this is a zombie printing machine in our deck. But let's say our commander dies, or one of our big boys dies, and we want to cast them again. How are we going to get them back? Well, we've got a fairly robust reanimation package. Let's go ahead and start with Dead Revels. Not reanimation first. This is actually a recursion piece. We can get 2 creatures from our graveyard to our hands, but importantly, it has Spectacle. If an opponent lost life this turn, we cut its mana cost in half. So it's real good for us. Let Rakdos die, play this, put it back in your hand, cast it without command tax. It's fine. It's fair. Then we have Garner the Blood Flame. When it enters the battlefield, return to your hand all creature cards in the graveyard that were put there from anywhere this turn, and other creatures you control gain haste. So this is doing a lot of work for us. On the one hand, this makes all of our big chunky boys be hasters. On the other hand, this is a flash way, this is an instant speed way to say, oh, I died to a board wipe? That's real inconvenient. I don't think I actually took a board wipe this turn. It may look like it, but nah, all my creatures are back. I've made an attempt in previous videos to say that when you're playing Commander, you should have a Lieutenant or some way to make your deck still function when your Commander is gone. This is why we have Reanimation and Recursion cards in decks like this. Our Commander dies, and no other card in the game does what our Commander does to the same degree, so instead of a Lieutenant, we have ways of replaying our Commander or reinforcing them. Then we have Champion of Stray Souls. Pay 5 mana, which of course you'll have because you're not spending mana on creatures that often. Sacrifice X creatures and return X creatures from the graveyard to the battlefield. So here's what we're doing with this guy. We are waiting a turn cycle, and as our turn is about to begin, we are using his ability, sacking all of our creatures on the board, and getting another set of creatures that have very, very powerful ETB effects. So let's say you've got the Voracious Fell Beast, Baleful Beholder, and Dusk Mangler on the board. Sacrifice all of them, and now get your Ghastly Death Tyrant, your Meteor Golem, your Dalek Drone. It doesn't matter that the previous creatures might have been better or had better stats. What you're trying to do is recycle them. You're recycling them on your opponent's turn so that when your turn comes up, you have all these creatures without summoning sickness, and they have all very powerful ETB abilities that we are going to be abusing with the Champion of Stray Souls. This card is really, really good. And if it's in our graveyard, we can put it on top of our library from our graveyard using its secondary ability. So unless they banish this card, we have access to it for most of the game. Then you have Chainer Nightmare Adept. To discard a card, you can cast any creature from your graveyard this turn. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if you didn't cast it from your hand, it gains haste, of course. And then we have an Eldrazi boy, Artisan of Kozilek. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, and it's got Annihilator 2 with a big, thick booty of 10/9. Remember, this is a colorless card, so most of the time we're going to cast this for 3 or 0 in this deck. A very, very strong card. And then we have Tarian's Journal. We can sack a creature to draw a card, but most importantly, we can use it to flip into the Tomb of Alcatraz, a land that will allow us to just cast creatures from our graveyard with a finality counter. Now, with how important our commander is in this deck, it's likely that our commander will die a lot. Our commander will hit the graveyard, we'll summon it from the graveyard using the Tomb of Alcatraz, and then if it dies with a finality counter, we just move it to the command zone. Every single time, this will allow us to lower the rate at which our commander is suffering command tax by half, while also just being a good reanimation spell in general. Now, the last things, we have a little bit of utility we need to get into. We have Hasty Boys. These are the things that will enable haste on our board. We already talked about some, but here's a few more. Rising of the Day, all our creatures get haste. Legendary creatures get 1/0. Tukatet Rubble Fort, it gives all your creatures haste. And then, of course, Cyclops of Eternal Fury, which we're not casting for full mana because of the deck we're playing. All of our creatures gain haste with the Cyclops' ability. And then finally, we have a singular board wipe, because as we are playing a deck with a lot of sacrifice everything triggers, we don't need as many board wipes as we otherwise would. But we have Deathbringer Regent. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it from your hand, if there are 5 or more other creatures on the board, blow up all other creatures. We still get to keep the Deathbringer Regent. I really like this guy, especially in a deck where we can cast him for such little mana. We can definitely take the board reset with his effect, though, because let's say that you've got Garn of the Bloodflame in your hand, or we've got the Champion of Stray Souls available to us. Anytime that we board wipe ourselves, we're just going to reset ourselves a little bit with it. It's not going to be the worst thing in the world. That said, we do still have to talk about our mana base, because our mana base is just as important as everything else in your deck. Do not neglect your mana base. So let's go ahead and begin with our dual lands. Shadowblood Ridge is a filter land, Foreboding Ruins is a reveal land, and Smoldering Marsh is a tango land that is searchable if we need it to be. And of course, Command Tower to tap for a color in our commander's identity. Then we have 5 fetching lands. I really prefer these over most other things because they can come into play untapped and just be untapped mana most of the time. So Shire Terrace, Grixis Panorama, Promising Veins, these are all the untapped fetching lands we have in the deck that can grab all the different types of lands in our deck. Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse can grab any of the basics in our deck. And then, of course, Myriad Landscape can get 2 basics from our deck, so this works as a ramp spell as well. As its price goes down, you also could put Escape Tunnel in here, but I built this deck actually before Escape Tunnel came out, so I'm going to wait and see what that card's price does. For some reason, Terramorphic is 10 cents, and Escape Tunnel's been sitting at 20, so that's been kind of weird. And then finally, we have 2 utility lands to get into. Piranha Marsh comes into play tapped when it ETBs. Target player loses a life. So this is basically just a land we are going to use to get a small discount on a card, or in some cases, we play the land so that Rakdos can be summoned at all. We don't want to be locked to being able to use certain attacks or ETBs or anything like that to play our commander. We want to be able to do that even from our land base. And then the Leech-Ridden Swamp comes into play tapped. It is a swamp, so if we have Swamp Search in the deck later on, you can actually search this with that as well. But we can tap it and make every opponent lose 1 life. Only if 2 or more of your permanents are black, but we've got plenty of black permanents in the deck, so that's easy for us to accomplish. But this will be a way from your land base to make sure that your commander is always playable and you've always got access to his discounting effect. And finally, we have the basic lands. We have 14 swamps, and we have 9 mountains, which leaves us with 35 lands and basically 23 ramp spells. More than that if you count some of the stuff we have attached to our lands. But there is our Rakdos Lord of Riots deck. You're going to be discounting spells a shit ton. You're going to be playing big, dirtily guys like Gary and Atali. You're going to be copying all of your spells up with Sunbird's Invocation, getting extra cards out of your deck with that. You're going to be putting big dudes on the board like Shard of the Nightbringer, and you're going to be doing all this with a huge discount because of cards like your Unruly Catapult, your Plague Spitter, your Psychosis Crawler, your Pestilence Demon. All of these are coming into play for minimal mana costs, and you're getting huge returns out of all of them. So that is Rakdos Lord of Riots. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you guys enjoyed the lore section in the beginning of the video as well. If you did, let me know in the comment section below. Also, remember, we do have a Discord. There's an MTG section in there if you would like to join and talk about Magic, or give me deck suggestions, or just show off the stuff that you guys have built. We've got a spell table section in there for anybody who might want to play some games. So let me know what you all think. Let me know what you want to do. And as always, everybody, insert end of video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability that Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here. And they would be Red Joker, Blitzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Nabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, Sagitt, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.